My name is Evelyn. At 62, I find myself standing on the threshold of what many would call the golden years. But I don't much care for that term. It implies softness, a time of winding down, of looking backward. I've never been one to look backward. It's not in my nature. I wasn't always like this, of course. There was a time when I was a school teacher, decades of molding young minds, listening to the hopes and dreams of children who thought they had the world at their feet. I taught English literature, but in reality, I taught life. At least, I like to think I did. It was a career I loved, even on the toughest days, when I felt invisible behind the stack of papers and the humdrum routine of grading, meetings, and parent conferences. I never really thought about retirement until I had to. Until one day, after decades in front of a classroom, the principal told me my time was up. I suppose that's just the way it goes when you're in your 60s. I didn't mind it though. No one else seemed to either. People act like you're supposed to mourn retirement. But for me, it was just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I had spent enough time giving everything I had to the world around me. Now it was my turn to think about what I wanted. I live in a modest apartment now. Nothing too flashy, just enough to keep me comfortable. The city can be loud, but the building is quiet, and that's enough. I have my books, my tea, and my small collection of houseplants that I've managed to keep alive for years. I had a husband once, too, John. He passed away 5 years ago after a long illness, and with his passing came the end of the life we had built together. I spent the first couple of years in a haze, unsure what to do with myself. The apartment felt too empty, the silence too deafening. I needed a change, something to make my life feel like it had purpose again. That's when I decided to sell the house, the one we had lived in for 30 years. It was a beautiful place, but it no longer felt like home without him. The decision wasn't an easy one, but it was necessary. I sold the house, took the money, and made a promise to myself. I would buy a little piece of land somewhere. I didn't know where yet, but somewhere quiet, somewhere I could plant a cherry tree, sit beneath it, and read my books without the distractions of the world around me. In my mind, I had envisioned a little cottage, maybe a small garden with flowers I could tend to in the mornings. Nothing extravagant, just something that belonged to me, something I could call my own. I imagined it with soft light filtering through the trees, birds singing in the distance, and the smell of fresh earth in the air. I called it my dream retreat, a place to find peace in my old age, a place where I could finally relax and enjoy the fruits of my labor. I had no grand plans for the future. I didn't need anything more than that. It was a simple wish, one that I thought any realtor would understand. But I was wrong. One morning, on a whim, I decided to visit a real estate agency. It was one of those firms that dealt with properties in upscale neighborhoods, the kind of place where the houses were new, with sleek facades, modern amenities, and manicured lawns. It wasn't far from the city, and I had seen the signs along the main road. I walked into the agency with a clear idea of what I wanted, a small plot, enough to build a modest home. But what I didn't expect was the attitude that came with it. The young man behind the desk looked me up and down as I approached. He couldn't have been more than 30, and his expression was one of polite indifference. His eyes flicked toward me, then back to his computer screen, where he was undoubtedly scrolling through listings. "How can I help you today?" he asked, with an air of boredom that was almost palpable. "I'm looking for a piece of land," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly. "Something not too far from the city, but not in the middle of it either. A quiet spot where I can build a small house." He didn't look up. "A small house, huh?" His voice was dismissive. "Well, we've got plenty of places out in the newer neighborhoods. Families are always looking for land there. Good schools, parks, modern developments might be right up your alley. I'm not interested in a family neighborhood, I said, smiling, hoping to make my point clear without being rude. I'm looking for somewhere more peaceful, a bit of space to myself. He finally looked at me, raising an eyebrow. Well, to be honest, he said, glancing at me over the rim of his glasses, this area isn't really for you. It's a place for young families, people in tech, people starting their careers. You'd be better off looking elsewhere. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. Did you just say that because of my age? He grinned, the sort of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, I'm just saying. This is a neighborhood for the young, you know? We cater to the active, the ambitious, not to, well, people like you. I felt my throat tighten. For a moment, I thought I might say something sharp, something biting, but I didn't. I simply nodded. Thank you for your time, I said, standing up. I walked out of the office, the young man's smirk still ringing in my ears, but I didn't leave it at that. The humiliation stung more than I expected, and I found myself dwelling on his words as I walked down the street, past shops and busy crowds. No one tells me where I belong, I muttered under my breath. No one. I had always been someone who didn't take no for an answer, not in my teaching career, not in life. If there was a challenge, I met it head on. And in that moment, I realized that what I wanted wasn't just a piece of land. I wanted to make a statement that I, at 62, was not to be dismissed. So I made up my mind. I wasn't going to leave that office defeated. Number I was going to buy the land he had rejected me from. I would buy the whole lot, and I would do something with it. Something meaningful. Something that would remind everyone that age does not define where you belong, nor should it limit your ambitions. And that's exactly what I did. The young agent's words echoed in my mind for days. At first, I tried to dismiss them, telling myself they were just the musings of an arrogant, self-important young man who had never faced real hardship. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that his words weren't just a passing insult. They were a reflection of a society that had decided I no longer had a place in the future. Active families, young techies. I repeated the words to myself as I sat at my kitchen table, stirring my morning tea. What had he meant by that? Was it because of my age? Was I too old to want something better for myself? Too old to have dreams? I wasn't angry at him. He was just a kid, probably fresh out of university, with little understanding of the real world. But the thing that bothered me most was that his attitude was everywhere. You could feel it in the way people looked at you when you walked into certain places, the way they spoke to you, as though the years you had lived had somehow erased your relevance. It was the same feeling I had gotten when I first retired, like you were supposed to fade away into the background, to become invisible. And I refused to let that happen. So, after a few days of stewing over it, I decided that I wasn't going to walk away from this. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. I just made the decision and set the plan into motion. I had enough savings to do this. More than enough. I didn't need to ask for help. All I needed was to find a way to purchase the land and to do it quietly, without anyone knowing what I was up to. I started by calling another realtor, one who had a reputation for handling more personal, independent transactions. A smaller firm, but with people who actually cared about what their clients wanted, instead of pushing them into a mold they didn't fit. When I walked into that office, I felt a small wave of relief. No smug young agent, no dismissive looks, just a warm greeting from a woman who looked at me like I was someone worth listening to. I need your help, I told her after a short introduction. There's a plot of land I'm interested in. I want to buy it, but I need to do it discreetly. She looked at me, nodding. I'll help you with that. Tell me more about it. I explained everything. The location of the land, the neighborhood the young agent had shown me, the modern houses, the families, and the energy of it all. I told her how the moment I was turned away, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just buying a plot of land, I was buying a piece of myself back. It's a beautiful area, I said, but it's not for me, not in the way they think. I want to buy it though, not to build something for myself. I want to create a place for people who are often forgotten. People like me. She didn't hesitate. I'll make the calls. We'll get this done. And that's exactly what we did. Over the next few weeks, I worked with her and a lawyer, carefully putting together a plan. I made the decision to invest everything I could, my savings, my shares, everything I had set aside for a rainy day. I knew it was a risk, a huge one. But for the first time in years, I felt the excitement of doing something big, something meaningful. The land, which originally seemed so distant and untouchable, was now within my grasp. And I wasn't going to stop until I had it. It wasn't long before I signed the paperwork. All 12 plots, a whole development, just waiting to be turned into something different, something more inclusive, something that spoke to a deeper need in society. I could see it all in my mind. A community, yes, but not the kind that rejected people like me. A place for the overlooked, the ones who had lived their lives with dignity and grace, only to be pushed aside as they grew older. I wasn't just buying property, I was taking a stand. A few months later, the construction began. I made sure to oversee every detail. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. The houses weren't going to be luxurious or overly expensive. I didn't care about flashy countertops or designer fixtures. What mattered was accessibility, ramps for wheelchairs, wide hallways, open spaces for those who might need extra room, and most importantly, a community space for gathering, for sharing stories, for feeling like they weren't invisible. I contacted a nonprofit organization that worked with veterans, widows, and the elderly, offering them a partnership. They could help me find the right people to rent the homes, ensuring that those who needed it most could afford the space. I didn't want this to be a place for speculation, a place where young professionals would try to flip houses for profit. I wanted this to be a sanctuary, a place where people could rest and live without the constant fear of being forgotten. As the houses began to take shape, I watched from a distance, and with every brick laid, I felt the weight of the decision I had made. It wasn't just about the property anymore. It was about proving something to myself and to the world. I remember the first time I drove by the site once the construction was finished. I had been so busy managing every little detail that I hadn't taken the time to step back and look at the whole picture. The houses were simple, but elegant. They weren't ostentatious, but they weren't bland either. They had character. And as I stood there, staring at what had once been a barren plot of land, I felt a deep sense of pride. This was my achievement. This was the life I had carved out for myself, without anyone's permission, without anyone telling me where I belonged. But I wasn't done yet. I called the nonprofit again. "It's time," I said. "Let's open the doors." And so we did. The day the houses were finally completed, I stood in front of them, watching as the finishing touches were added. Small, thoughtful details like garden lights along the pathways, handrails painted in soft colors to blend into the surroundings, and benches under the trees where people could sit and relax. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt homey. It felt like a place where someone could breathe, where they wouldn't have to hide their age or feel like they were unwelcome because they had a few more years behind them than the average resident. I hadn't told many people about what I was doing. The few friends I had left, most of them older than I, knew about my plans, but they didn't truly understand the scale of what I was trying to build. Some had been concerned, advising me to save my money for myself, telling me that I was too old to take on such a big project. but none of them knew the fire that had been ignited in me when that young agent had dismissed me. This wasn't just about buying land. It wasn't even about the houses or the community I was creating. It was about showing the world, especially people like that agent, that we, older people, the ones they ignored, the ones who didn't matter in the glossy brochures of city living, still had power, still had voices, still had dreams. And this would be my statement. I had already made contact with a local nonprofit organization that specialized in helping veterans, widows, and the elderly find affordable housing. They had agreed to partner with me, ensuring that those who needed the space most would have access to it. They'd also take on the responsibility of helping the residents integrate into the community, organizing social events, providing transportation, and offering services for those who needed extra care. I wanted this place to be more than just a set of houses. I wanted it to be a vibrant community, a place where people could come together, share stories, and support one another. I knew that a lot of older people, people like me, were left isolated, abandoned by their families, or too proud to ask for help. I wanted Evelyn Place to be a sanctuary, a place where no one would feel like they were a burden or out of place. It took months of planning, talking to contractors, ensuring that everything was accessible, that there were no barriers to entry for people with disabilities. I had ramps installed everywhere, on the steps, in the hallways, to the porches, just in case. I made sure the kitchens had lower countertops, and bathrooms were designed with wide, easy-to-reach sinks and showers with handrails. Even the signs on the houses, which had once been so plain, were now carefully crafted, simple but dignified. It was no longer just a plot of land. It was a living, breathing place that reflected everything I stood for. I had poured my heart and soul into this. I had invested my savings, my time, and all the energy I had left. In the back of my mind, though, there was a nagging thought. What if no one came? What if no one even wanted to live here? But those doubts were fleeting. I had made my decision, and it had been the right one. As the houses neared completion, I decided to host an event, a quiet opening ceremony, if you will. I didn't want anything too flashy, nothing that would attract attention for the wrong reasons. I didn't want this to be about me. This was about the people who would be living here. I wanted them to know that they weren't forgotten, that there was a place where they could live without shame or fear. The invitation list was small, just the nonprofit team, a few potential residents, and some of the construction workers who had helped make Evelyn Place a reality. But in the weeks leading up to the event, something unexpected happened. Word got out. The press didn't come. They probably wouldn't have cared. But other people, people who had been following the story, who had heard about what I was doing, started calling. They were curious. They wanted to know more. It was almost as if they too had been waiting for something like this to happen. A place where they could feel valued, where their age wasn't something to be swept under the rug. The day of the opening, I stood on the porch of the central house, now the administrative center, with my hands clasped in front of me, looking out over the little community I had created. The sky was clear, the sun warm but not too hot, the air just beginning to feel like summer, and people started arriving. First, the residents from the nonprofit arrived, some veterans, others widows, some just people who had fallen through the cracks. They were the ones who needed this place most. They were the first to move in. As they walked through the houses, their eyes lit up with surprise. The wide hallways, the wide windows that let in so much light, the little gardens outside each house. They saw what I had envisioned, a place that wasn't just a house, but a community, a place where no one had to feel invisible. And then, out of nowhere, the young agent walked in. He wasn't expecting it. His eyes darted around, a little confused, a little unsure of what he was looking at. And then he saw me. For a moment, he didn't recognize me. He stared at me like he was trying to place me. And then it clicked. His face flushed with embarrassment. He probably wasn't expecting to find me here, standing in the middle of what was now a thriving community, with residents moving in, exchanging pleasantries, and claiming their space. It must have stung, seeing the very thing he had dismissed and written off as impossible. I saw the young agent as he approached slowly, his face flushed a deep crimson. He looked around, trying to pretend that everything was normal, trying to hide his surprise. He cleared his throat and straightened his suit, no doubt feeling the weight of the situation. The fact that this place, which he had written off, was now bustling with life. I crossed my arms, watching him closely. He probably thought I wouldn't recognize him, but I had an excellent memory, especially for faces that left an impression on me. The last time I had seen him, he had dismissed me, made me feel small, as if my age was an obstacle. Today, the atmosphere was different. He was no longer the one with the power. He was standing in front of something that had shaken his assumptions to their core. His eyes met mine, and for a second, there was an awkward silence. He spoke first, his voice a little hesitant. I I didn't expect to see you here. No, I said calmly. I don't suppose you did. His discomfort was palpable. I watched as he took a small step back, taking in the scene before him. The vibrant group of people chatting among themselves, the blooming flower beds, the laughter echoing softly in the background. It wasn't the kind of place he was used to, I suppose. It wasn't a flashy, upscale neighborhood for the young, the tech-savvy, or the wealthy. But that was exactly the point. I didn't think you were interested in this kind of place, he continued, as though searching for words to explain his earlier dismissal. I thought, I thought it wasn't your kind of neighborhood. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the smile of someone who had finally reached the top of a mountain and was now looking down on the very person who had once told them it wasn't possible to climb it. Clearly, you were wrong, I said simply. He looked around again, his gaze lingering on the people moving into their new homes. There was a mix of ages, some in their 50s, some in their 70s, but they all seemed to belong here. They weren't just residents, they were part of a community that had been built with care, with thought, and with dignity. They weren't invisible, they were finally seen. I didn't realize this was your project, he said after a pause, trying to sound professional, but it was clear that the shock was still settling in. I nodded. It is, and now it's a place for people like me, people who have been forgotten, discarded, and overlooked, people who have more to offer than just the passage of time. There was a long pause before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice softened. I, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I tilted my head, studying him. The sincerity in his eyes was there, but it was also mixed with the embarrassment of someone who had made a mistake they couldn't undo. You didn't offend me, I replied, but you did underestimate me, and that's a mistake you'll have to live with. I could see him processing my words. His expression was torn, between regret and something else, maybe curiosity. Maybe he wanted to understand how I had done it. Maybe he wanted to know what it took to build something that couldn't be dismissed. I don't understand, he finally admitted. How did you manage all of this? You bought the land, you built these houses, you created this community. How did you do it? I smiled again, a little more genuinely this time. I did it the same way I've done everything in my life, with patience, with experience, and with the belief that if you're willing to fight for something, even if the world tells you it's impossible, you can make it happen. He stood there for a moment, his face still soft with surprise. It wasn't the surprise of someone who had just learned a lesson. It was the surprise of someone who had just been shown that their narrow view of the world was insufficient, that the things they took for granted, like age and power, could be so much more than they had ever imagined. I didn't think people like you, older people, wanted something like this, he said, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. Well, that's where you're wrong, I replied, my gaze steady. People like me, people who have lived, who have loved, who have lost, are the ones who know what it means to truly appreciate a home, a place that isn't just a building, but a foundation, a place that doesn't look at you and see someone who's outlived their usefulness, a place that values you, not because of how old you are, but because of who you are. He nodded slowly, his mind clearly racing. I could see the wheels turning as he processed everything he had just learned. Maybe he didn't fully understand it yet, but I could tell that this experience, this moment, would stay with him for a long time. He had just seen the power of a woman who wouldn't be silenced, a woman who refused to accept the roles that others had tried to assign her, a woman who had, in her own quiet way, changed everything. As the day wore on, more people arrived. The community center was full, the air warm with conversation and laughter. And as I looked out over the crowd, I realized that I had built more than just homes. I had built a legacy, one that would endure long after I was gone. The young agent left quietly, but I didn't feel the need to say goodbye. He had already learned what he needed to learn. His judgment had been clouded by his youth, by the arrogance that often accompanies a lack of experience. But now he knew, now he understood. And as I stood there, watching the sun begin to set over the new homes, I felt something deep inside me settle, something that had been unsettled for a long time. I had found my place, and I would never let anyone tell me again that I didn't belong. A year had passed since that day, a year since I had turned the young agent's dismissive words into a testament of power, quiet resilience, and purpose. Life at Evelyn Place had become something more than I ever imagined. The neighborhood was now vibrant, a mix of veterans, widows, retirees, and those whose lives had been left behind by a world that moved too fast, too impatiently. Each home was filled with stories of perseverance, of people who had faced rejection or loss and found a place where they were finally seen, where they finally belonged. It was late afternoon when I saw him again, the young agent. He didn't see me at first, which was fine by me. He was walking across the main street, looking up at the houses with a contemplative expression on his face. The once shiny suit he wore when I met him was now a bit duller, more lived in, like it had seen its fair share of unexpected encounters. His eyes roamed over the neighborhood, taking in the details, the flower boxes on windowsills, the freshly painted doors, the soft hum of life. There was no denying it. Evelyn Place had become a part of the landscape, part of the fabric of the town. Then his eyes locked on mine. For a moment he hesitated, unsure of how to approach. His expression was a mixture of awe and uncertainty, and I could see that the arrogant young man I had encountered the year before was now replaced by someone more humbled, more thoughtful. He took a few steps toward me, his hands slipping into his pockets as he did so. I watched him closely, my arms crossed. No words came at first, just the silence of two people who were both fully aware of the passage of time and of the changes that it could bring. Finally, he spoke. I I didn't recognize you at first, he said, his voice softer than I remembered. I mean, I didn't think you'd be someone who would want to do this. I smiled, a little amused. What is it that you thought I would do? Well, he hesitated, clearly not wanting to be blunt again, but the words were coming anyway. I thought maybe you'd be content with a smaller place, something, More age appropriate, you know? He ran a hand through his hair. But this is impressive. I raised an eyebrow, not at all offended by his clumsy admission. Well, you thought wrong, but I'm sure it's a lesson you'll remember. People like me, older people, are just as capable, just as driven, and often more creative than people who think they have it all figured out. He nodded, his gaze shifting to the homes behind me, his eyes studying each one with newfound appreciation. It's beautiful, he said quietly, more to himself than to me. It is, I agreed, and it's a place where people can feel valued, where their needs aren't brushed aside because they don't fit into a certain mold. He looked back at me. I can see that now. I didn't understand it at first. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle inside me, not because I needed his approval, far from it, but because I had proven a point that needed to be made, a point about respect, about dignity, about what it means to build something that isn't for the fleeting whims of youth or the flashy trends of the moment. What I had built wasn't for me alone. It was for all those who had been overlooked, forgotten, ignored. People who had stories and experiences to share, who had decades of wisdom to offer, but were pushed aside by a society that only valued the young. Well, I said, my voice calm, I did what I thought was right. I didn't need anyone to tell me where I could or couldn't go. He stood there for a moment, clearly processing my words. I could see that he was changing, that his view of the world was being altered, one small piece at a time. The arrogance, the quick judgment, the assumptions, they were falling away, and in their place was a recognition that he had missed something important, something that I had known all along. He cleared his throat, looking at me with something that resembled respect, or perhaps humility. You've built something truly remarkable here. I wasn't sure at first, but now I see. I cut him off before he could continue, not out of rudeness, but because I knew exactly what he was trying to say. You see it now, I said, my voice steady, but only because you were willing to open your eyes, to see beyond your assumptions, to see people for who they really are, not for what you think they should be. He swallowed hard, then nodded, his gaze moving over the street again. I think I've learned a lot from you, Evelyn, more than I expected. I allowed myself a small smile. Good. It's about time someone learned the value of experience. It's not something that can be taught overnight. He paused for a moment, and then, as if some weight had lifted from his shoulders, he finally offered me an apology. I'm sorry, Evelyn, for what I said when we first met. I I didn't realize how wrong I was. I met his eyes, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acknowledgement. It's all right. I don't hold grudges, but I do believe in learning from our mistakes. He nodded, looking down for a moment. I'll make sure I carry that lesson with me. It's more than just about age, isn't it? It's about respect, about recognizing people for who they are, not what they can do or how they look. I smiled again, this time with a sense of quiet pride. Exactly. And that's the real lesson. There was a pause, and I could feel the weight of the conversation sinking in for both of us. He had learned something that was hard for young people to grasp sometimes, something that I had learned years ago, in the midst of hardship and loss. That age doesn't define you. It's your heart, your courage, and your actions that truly matter. Well, he said, straightening up, I should let you get back to your work. I've taken up enough of your time. I'm not going anywhere, I replied softly. I'm right where I need to be. He nodded one last time, offering a respectful handshake. As he walked away, I stood there, watching him go, and I felt a small sense of closure. The neighborhood was thriving, the people were thriving, and I had finally done what I set out to do, to create a place where people, no matter their age, could live with dignity. And as I turned back toward the garden, toward my cherry tree, I felt a peace settle in my heart because, in the end, I hadn't just built a community. I had built a symbol of what happens when you refuse to be overlooked, a symbol of the power of resilience, respect, and the courage to make your own way. And it had all started with a single decision, a decision to prove that no one could tell me where I belonged.